Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be part 3 in the series of macromolecules of life. Just to recall what macromolecules are, we know that the prefix macro means large. So if we put that together, we can just infer that macromolecules are large molecules that make up living things. In the previous 2 videos, we went over what carbohydrates and proteins were. So if you haven't checked out those 2 videos yet, I encourage you to do so that you know what kind of track we're going to be talking about regarding lipids and nucleic acids in the future. So again, this is just part 3 of the 4 videos. Okay, so lipids, what are they? Lipids are primarily oils and fats. And if you've taken biology before, you can recall that the cell membrane or the lipid bilayer is made up of lipids, hence the name lipid bilayer. And this is super important as we're going to learn later because a lipid can form sort of a wax that is water insoluble and hydrophobic, which means that it doesn't let water in or out of the cell, especially when you're talking about the cell membrane. Additionally, lipids are also hormones. So they are some of the common hormones you might have heard of are cholesterol, testosterone, and estrogen. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But before we go on to the next slide, look on the right side and you'll see a picture of healthy fats. And indeed, lipids aren't all that bad for our body, even though you might associate fat with being unhealthy. Some fats are actually really good for our body. As you'll learn in the next slide, some of the functions of lipids are really important to key bodily processes. So in the picture here, you can see a bunch of foods that have good healthy fats and healthy lipids for our bodies. Next slide. Okay, the function of lipids. So the lipids have many functions. Let's just go through them and then I'll explain each of them in detail. So energy storage, waterproof coverage, cell membranes, hormones, and insulation for our body. For energy storage, lipids store energy in the form of fats and oils. So think of your energy reserves as the extra fat on our bodies, which is also important when it comes to insulation. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Waterproof coverage. Specifically on plant and animal bodies, waterproof coverage is found in the form of wax. So if you look at the 2 pictures on the right, sea otters, they have a waxy body, so that enables them to stay afloat. And for certain plants, they might look kind of glossy like this, or they might have a matte finish that enables them because they have wax. And wax is very important for a multitude of reasons. On plants, it makes sure that the extra water content doesn't leak out, and it makes sure that nothing else can come inside the plant, sort of like a cell membrane like we talked about before. But for plants, that's really important. For animals like sea otters, where they need the wax to stay afloat in their habitat, it's important for them because obviously they wouldn't be able to be in the water without that wax on their body. Okay, next up in the list, cell membranes. So we talked about this before, but the lipid bilayer is actually made up of phospholipids. If you look over here, you can see the phospholipid bilayer, how each layer, so like the first layer and the bottom layer, they have a hydrophobic tail and a hydrophilic head. Just a couple of references. Hydrophobic means it is water insoluble, so it rejects water. And then the hydrophilic means that it loves water, so it allows water to permeate inside. So this layer is on the outside of the cell. So we have hydrophobic tails on the inside and then the hydrophobic heads on the outside. So yeah. Okay, next let's talk about hormones. As I mentioned in the previous slide, cholesterol, testosterone, and estrogen, common hormones, and lipids make up these hormones that are really important to our bodily functions. For example, the menstruation cycle. We know that a lot of hormones play a key role into this cycle. And also hormones are very important in body development as well. Okay, and our final function for the lipids, insulation and cushioning in the body. So obviously insulation is very important for us humans because we don't have the type of fur that some of the furry animals have. So we need an extra layer of fat on our bodies to create that warmth for ourselves. Otherwise, we would be very, very cold. So lipids come into play when we see extra fat on our bodies on the outsides. And don't get me wrong, fat is good for us, and it's not that I'm saying that we should get rid of that extra fat. To a point, it's healthy to have fat. But again, if we consume a lot of foods that have lipids in it and extra carbohydrates in it, then that gets to a point where our weight keeps building up. But a reminder that to an extent, having fat on our body in the form of insulation is actually good for us because it keeps us warm. Okay, next let's talk about the structure of lipids. So lipids are large chains of nonpolar hydrocarbons, and hydrocarbon just basically means that you have hydrogen and carbon, and you also have a carboxyl group and oxygen as well. So a great example is this diagram I have here. So lauric acid is actually a fatty acid commonly found in coconut oil, and lauric acid is a lipid. So as you can see, this is the gigantic hydrocarbon chain that we have here. So the large chains of nonpolar hydrocarbons. So this is our hydrocarbon chain. And then we have our carboxyl group, which basically ties it all together to make it an acid for lauric acid. But the key thing for a lipid to have is the hydrocarbon chain. Okay, and finally, the hydrophobic and water-insoluble characteristic. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, the characteristics or the functions of lipids that enable it to be water-insoluble are waterproof coverage and the cell membranes. So just again, if you ever tried the experiment of mixing water with oil, it never works because water and oil don't mix because of its unique structure. So we have the hydrocarbon chain. We also have the phospholipid bilayers. So we just know that lipids and water do not mix well. So if you haven't tried this experiment, it's super cool to see how water and oil don't mix. Obviously, it looks a lot like this picture where there are a bunch of bubbles, and you just can clearly see the distinction between the water and the oils. So try out that experiment if you haven't tried it yet. And that concludes it for our lipids video today. Just a quick recap, we went over lipid structure, the function of lipids, and what lipids are basically. So if you have any questions, feel free to email us at excelledlearning@gmail.com. Our email is linked in our description box below. Feel free to check out our social media pages. We're on Instagram and we're also on Facebook. And check out our website if you're looking for any other information or if you want custom videos for yourself that we can make for you every single week. We'd be happy to help out.